That's right. I don't. It distracts me like squirrel.
I completely get it.
Okay, the only announcements I can think of is next Monday night, we have our Sisters of Faith meeting here at 6 o'clock. And if we get all the items that we have on our list for the backpacks that we're doing, then we will do that. And Kathy has a really fun craft. If you see in the window there, the flower with the melted crayons, we're going to be making those. That's the only thing I can think of, other than pray for all those that's traveling today and all those that will be traveling tomorrow to go to Red Oak to see Pastor Melody be ordained as a pastor. And we're all excited about that power. So now, instead of her preaching, I get to introduce my other daughter. I got 2 daughters and they're both pastors. What can I say? Tracy, they have a little bit of a different style, but a lot of similarities in it. But I think you're going to really enjoy her. She brings the word truly from God's word. So, Tracy, come on up. Hey. How is everybody? Can I stop one thing? Yeah. Sorry. We've got offering. Oh, yeah. Nathan, you want to go?
Yeah,
I'll do an interpretive dance. No, just kidding.
And she's fun.
Oh, well, you got it on there. Yeah, what? Yeah. So while we're passing that, I'll just introduce myself a little. I am Mel's much younger sister. 23 months to be exact. Anyway, so we're super proud of Mel and everything that she's doing. So I'm super honored to be able to speak for her this morning. And we're super excited to see what God's doing here at the gathering. It's been amazing. Has it been a year yet?
Yes.
It's been a year. So it's been amazing to see. I came to a service very early on, I think the first one maybe. And I said, no, you can just, you can just go. I've been to a lot of churches in my life. And I said, you can just walk into a place and kind of be in a service and you can be like, oh, God's in this. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of just feel like God's at work in what you guys are doing here. And I think that's because your heart is for the community. And so I'm just excited to see all these next steps. So she's going to be ordained tomorrow. We're super excited about that. And I have to ride in between these two. Not in between them, but I'm riding in a car with them for 5 hours. So if you could add that to your intercessory list.
Yeah, because she's going to drive us nuts.
Yeah, they're going to be fighting the whole time. But anyway, so it's been a while since I've gotten to share. I used to be in full-time ministry and then I had babies. So sometimes when you have babies, it kind of like derails your normal plans for your life. So now I'm home with them, which I love. So anyway, I'm excited to be here to share with you guys, but I am a little rusty. So, if you want to every now and then go, okay, you're going to make it. I'll receive that from you. But, so who here uses social media? Anybody on Facebook out here? Anybody checking it? So, do you see how on Facebook, like all the time, there's people there's quizzes that you can take that are like, which character from this show are you, or whatever. And aren't those so fun? Yeah. If there's like a show that you really like, I don't know if I should admit this, but because it's really not in my generation, but for some reason I really think the Golden Girls are hilarious. So my friends and I would always be like, oh, you're totally Blanche, or you're totally Rose. And we like to relate to which character you are in your favorite show or whatever. Or some of the quizzes on Facebook are really weird. It's like, if you were a flavor of pizza, what would you be? How did they figure this out? It's really just some kind of scam. I think spam trying to get into your information. But anyway, for some reason we find that funny, right? But I think that's because we like to find ourselves in other stories. I think that's what we like about sitcoms. That's what we like about stories. Is like you can kind of relate because you see a little bit of your own story in that. And to me, that's what I've always found fascinating about the Bible. Is it's the most engaging story in that way, right? Like when we read through the Bible, there's something about it that even though it's a story about so many different people, like thousands of years ago, completely different world, like you see yourself in it, right? Have you guys read through the Bible and you see a certain story and you're like, oh my gosh, this story, it's like it's written about me. And I think that's one of the reasons the Bible is just such a powerful tool that God has used. He's used human story to kind of communicate himself to us, to introduce himself to us. And so I spent a lot of years in school just studying the Bible because I find it so fascinating in those stories. So I love just picking out a story in the Bible and doing that same thing that we do on Facebook. I look at a story and I'm always kind of like, if I was in this moment in Scripture, which character would I be? And I think usually we like to see ourselves as the hero, right? What's really fun is when you're reading a story and you look at the people that were usually like, oh, I can't believe they didn't get it. Like the disciples most of the time. And the Israelites in the Old Testament were like, oh my gosh, they're so clueless. But what's really fun is when you look at it and go, maybe I'm that character in the story, right? Because we always like to think we're the hero. Bible is just to look at it, to take a story out of the Bible and just look at it and be like, okay, where do I see my life? And in some moments I might be the hero. I might be like, oh yeah, I kind of got it going on in this area. And sometimes I'm like, ooh, I might be the Pharisee or the person that Jesus is trying to call out in this story. But it's always been that way for me. How many of you know the story of Abraham, who had to wait for a really, really long time for God to fulfill a promise? Anybody else ever feel like God's giving you a promise that you had to wait a really, really long time? Right. So you read those stories and you're like, oh, I'm Abraham. Or Mel this morning at Homeland addressed Jonah. How many of you ever felt like Jonah, where God had to go to extreme measures to teach you a lesson of discipline and obedience? So probably you've never been swallowed by a big fish. But, thank goodness he doesn't seem to operate in that dramatic sort of way anymore. But I could look at that and I can see myself in Jonah. So today we're going to look at a story, one of my favorite stories, which is probably really familiar to us. And I just challenge you to kind of think about it in that way as we read the story together. Think about, where am I in this story? Or what is God trying to, who's he trying to point out in this story for me today? So this is my Bible today. So, very from the future. Traveling, so we're going to be in Matthew 14. If you want to join us. And this story shows up in a couple of the Gospels, 3 of them, but this is the only one where it talks about kind of like Peter's portion of the story. So that's why I chose to come to it from Matthew. And we're going to read, start in verse 22. If you have your Bibles with me. If not, I'll try to read slow. I talk really fast, not just when I'm preaching, but like all the time, ever since birth. So we'll try to meet in the middle. I'll try to slow down a little and you guys try to keep up. Okay. So Matthew 14 verse 22, it says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So for a little bit of background, he just fed over 5,000 people with some loaves and some fish. Everybody familiar with that story? They were like, oh, there's not enough food for all these people. Jesus is like, oh, we got this. So they started passing around some little kids' Lunchable, and boom, by the end they had all eaten and there was leftovers. So that's who we want to invite for Thanksgiving, right? So multiply it all. So anyway, this huge miracle has just happened. So right after that, Jesus said, made the disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So the disciples went off without him. He was spending some time in prayer, and then by the time he's ready to join them, they're already out in the middle of the water, and it's kind of stormy. So shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they, as you would be, were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water. It's a pretty cool day, right? Walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. So it's always interesting to watch the story of the disciples because they have these moments a lot where they recognize Jesus, who he is. But then it's so hard to wrap your mind around. For us, it's like, we kind of get it now because we've had all these years to ponder it and, learn about it. But for them, living in that moment, it's like they would get it for a minute, and then a minute later they'd be like, is he crazy? Is he cheating? Like, we don't know what's going on here. So in this story, they had just witnessed this amazing miracle, and they got to participate in it, of Jesus feeding 5,000 people. I mean, how cool would that be to be the person that gets to hand that out, right? And see the miracle as it happens. So then Jesus sends them off alone, and a lot of Jesus' disciples were experienced fishermen, but the Bible says that they were caught in a storm. So it's never a good thing to be caught in a storm in a boat, right? So the first thing that I want to talk about from the story is this idea that storms are going to come to interrupt our faith. So here the disciples are right after a miracle, and if you read right after what the passage we just shared, they're getting ready to go participate in another really amazing season. So like on one side of the lake, they're feeding 5,000 people, and then when they get to the other side, they're going to be people, like tons and tons of people are going to be brought to Jesus and be healed as they touch him. So, I mean, those are two really great stories, right? Wouldn't it be nice if you could just skip from the one really awesome miracle to the next miracle, and there was never any glitches in the road. Is that how our life works, though? No. There's going to be a storm, right, that's going to come and interrupt our faith. Wherever we are in the journey, if you haven't had it yet, spoiler alert, something's going to happen, right, that's going to catch you off guard and that's going to interrupt your storm. And that's what happened here. And if you think about it, it could have stopped them in their tracks, right? They could have just depending on how you handle a storm when you're in it, it determines a lot about your future, right? Because in the middle of the storm, it's easy to forget about all the miracles that God just did, even if it was just a moment ago. And it's hard to have hope for the miracles that are in the future because you're just so focused on that storm right in the moment, right? So it could have stopped them, but it didn't. It was an interruption. And sometimes I think we look at our storms as being like the end of the story, but they're interruptions. If you can think about them that way, it makes it a little more manageable, right? So it was an interruption for them. It was a learning opportunity. So even though there is a storm in the story, I don't think that's like the theme of the story, right? The theme of the story is how Jesus was at work in that.
Yes.
How he was at work before it, how he was at work after it. And that's the theme of all of our stories. You know, we think it's about like, oh, this crisis that I'm going through, this thing I'm happening, but no, we're all just kind of like side characters in this story of Jesus. And in some ways you're kind of like, well, that's no fun. I want to be the main character of my own story. But in other ways, it's kind of liberating, right? Because we're all a part of this much bigger story, and that's what I love about this. It's like Jesus was there before, he was there after, and then boom, he pops up right in the middle, walking on the water, right? So like there is no storm, there is no location in which Jesus cannot find you and cannot be a part of your story if you're looking for him, right? So it's the same in our storms. I think our storms try to interrupt us. I think it's the enemy's way of trying to interrupt us from participating in God's work. And if we can just be aware and look around in those situations and see where Jesus is in that, like the disciples did, mostly Peter, more so than the others. The others were like, we'll stay on the boat. But Peter's like, hey, jumping in. So you guys know in here who's Peter. See, I got you, Angie. Yeah, so you know, we might be more of the cautious disciples that are like, I'm going to watch this play out first before I dip my toes in. But Angie, she'd be like, call me out there, Jesus, right?
I'll be back.
Absolutely.
He brought a pillow.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, that was the other story. Yeah, that was the one where he was asleep in the boat, and they were like, that was the really bad storm. So even when the storm is all that you can see, Jesus is still the center of the story. So whatever you're going through, just remember that God is still the center of the story. He's still using your life and writing a story in your life that has great purpose. So then it's interesting, the whole part about Peter, right? Because this is the only one of the Gospels that talks about Peter walking on the water. We see in the other ones, they talk about Jesus walking on the water, but they kind of leave this part out, which is pretty spectacular if you think about it. So there's a boat full of disciples, and only one disciple decided, like, I want to experience what's happening right now with Jesus. I find that interesting, just for a moment, just to think about which one would I have been. I don't know, I'm kind of a cautious person. I don't know if I would have been the Peter that said, oh, it's Jesus, I trust you, I'm going to jump out and walk on the water with you. I don't know if I would have just been one of the other disciples in the boat like, yay, like, stay here safe with my floaties. They probably didn't have floaties. So everyone else was in spectator mode, but here's Peter. He wants to participate in the story. So as Peter had a tendency to do, though, if you follow the life of Peter, he's a really fun character to watch because he has a tendency to make like a really big leap in his faith, but then like totally miss the mark. You know what I mean? Like he takes the jump, but he does not stick the landing, like a lot. In the New Testament. So like it's a theme in his life, right? He's kind of a rash, like he loves Jesus with so much passion, but follow through, not always there. So Peter, props to him for wanting to be a part of the miracle, but he doesn't always, like I said, have the best follow through. And that's where I think is an interesting, that's the second point I want to bring out today. First was that the storms will interrupt your faith, but the second one is this. Faith is not just a one-step journey. Because Peter took that one step really good, right? Got out of the boat, was like, hey, like, walking on water, pretty cool. And I think sometimes that's how we treat our faith. It's like, I just have to make this one choice to follow Jesus, and then check, I'm done, everything's done. But that's not how biblical faith is described. It's not just a one-step, like, here I'm not living in faith, here I am living in faith. I mean, we do make that decision to follow Jesus, and I do believe that's a life-changing decision. But I think it's like Peter's walk on the water. It's not just one step, it needs to be a continuous movement towards Jesus. And so when Peter stopped making that movement towards Jesus, bad stuff happened, right? Because he made the one step really good, But then he got distracted by the wind, the storm, like we talked about in the previous point. He got distracted by the wind, and so he stopped making movement towards Jesus. And what happens when we stop making movement towards Jesus?
Come on.
We sink. And so it's not just one step that Peter had to take. It was a choice to continue making those steps towards Jesus. And it's the same for us. Sometimes the first choice is the hardest, depending on what you're coming out of. Maybe you're coming out of a life that was very far from the ways of Jesus. Maybe it's the hardest choice for you. For some people, it's the easiest, right? It feels the easiest. Like, I'm just going to make this choice. But there's a series of choices that comes after that. And another spoiler, it's never over. Like, we're never done. Like, that walk towards Jesus in this life, we never complete it. He's always going to be a little bit further out for us because we can't ever, quite reach what Jesus has for us, right? So if we don't keep having that forward momentum, we're going to be like Peter. We're going to sink. So choosing to follow Jesus and live in faith is not just one step. It's a continual decision to walk towards Jesus all the time. It's a decision you make every day. It's a decision you make every time you face a storm, every situation that you encounter. Convenient Christianity would say you just choose to follow Jesus and then breathe easy till you see those pearly gates, right? Because that's like what it's all about. But it's not about that. It's about the life we live in between now and then.
Yes.
And if we're walking towards Jesus, what kind of life will that look like? It'll be a life that when other people see it, they see Jesus or they are drawn to him. So our biblical Christianity is saying, I'm going to take one step out of the boat and then I'm going to keep walking, even when there's wind, even when I'm terrified, even when I'm afraid I might sink. So Peter shows that, there's never a moment where we're invincible in our faith, right? Because if there was ever a moment where you'd be like, this person hasn't mastered, wouldn't you think like the person who had the faith to walk on water would be that person? But literally, within like one more sentence, he's sinking. And to me, that's such a humbling reminder that no matter how safe we think we are in our faith and secure we are, how apt and able we all are to fail, right? Because without walking towards Jesus, that's the journey. And if we don't, we can sink, just like Peter. Because we like to tease Peter, but he had a lot of faith and a lot of passion. But then within 1 minute, he was experiencing this great moment of faith, and in the next, he was sinking. So it's not just one step. It's a choice to enter a journey that is more of a commitment than just making one decision. But the good news is, when Peter started to sink, Jesus was not like some of us would be and be like, good luck. Hope you took swimming lessons, right? And so that brings us to our third and the final point that I want to share with you today is, with Jesus, failure is never final, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what the enemy would like us to
So
think.
good.
Yeah, you sink once, game over, right? But Peter, he's not perfect, but when he started to sink, he said, Lord, save me, right? And isn't that that's the cry of all of our hearts. At some point in our life, if we've accepted Jesus, it's like, God, I've got all this screwed up. I need you to save me. And it's not just a one-time thing. There are moments in my life, I need Jesus to save me from road rage. I need Jesus to save me from my 5-year-old. Okay, yeah. Because of behavior or whatever. So we need Jesus to save us in more than just that one moment. There are lots of moments where we need Jesus to save our decisions and lots of different things about us. But so failure isn't final. So even though Peter started to sink, that story of victory that had turned into failure then turns into a story of rescue. And so that's what I was saying earlier about how our life, you can be in the storm and you feel like that's permanent, but nothing's really permanent, right? I tell myself this all the time because a couple years ago I went through a really difficult season in my life after my second baby was born, and my life sort of kind of unraveled for a while because of postpartum issues that I had. And I had to tell myself during that time, because it was a really dark place, I had to tell myself, a lot of times I have to say, every day won't be like today. Every day won't be like today. Until finally one day I woke up and it was finally not like the day before. And so I still remind myself of that nothing's permanent, not the good, because I saw a lot of good things disappear in a moment, right, except for Jesus and family, everything else, oh dear. So nothing's permanent, not the good, but also not the bad, right? And it's that we see that here with Peter. He goes from, like I said, a moment of jumping out of the boat, sinking, being rescued by Jesus. It's so we can always just hang on for that next moment. Jesus has something else to do in that story, so we don't ever have to feel like the moment that we're in is the end of the story. Failure is never final if you allow Jesus to be a part of the story that you're in. So Peter is not perfect. I think we can all, I mean, you can see that in this story, and if you know the other stories of Peter, you can see that he's not perfect in a lot of those stories that he's in. But I still, when I look at this story, I'd rather be him and taking that leap of faith, even if I knew I was going to sink and have to be rescued or whatever, I'd still rather be that character in the story than the other ones who were just kind of more passively on the sidelines, you know. And that's not to judge. I mean, if they all jumped out of the boat, I mean, Jesus would have tried to rescue all of them at once, activate octopus arms. I don't know what he would have done. Would have been cool. Anyway, would have been a wild story. It's already a wild story, but you know, so God has his reasons for everything. But I'd rather be the Peter in the story, right? That like takes that moment, takes that courageous step, and so to step out of the boat was a courageous step. That was not a natural thing. And so I think that this story challenges us in our faith to be like, what outside of my comfort zone would God be challenging me to do? And am I willing to do that even if I'm going to publicly sink? Am I willing to do that? And the only reason we should be able to say that is because we know we have Jesus.
Yes.
That we can say, Lord, save me, right? Because if he calls us to do something, as he told Peter to come out on the water, and we do it, and we're faithful to do it, then do we really think he's going to just let us drown? No, like that's not the kind of God that we serve, right? When he calls us and we're obedient, he's going to be faithful to help us in our weakness and in our failures.
Right.
And that makes the story even more about him, right? When other people see us trying and failing and getting back up and see how God works in our lives, even in those difficult situations, like that is such a huge testimony of who God is and his love and his power, right? Like, oh, he can use that. If he can use that girl, in spite of all that, all of her shortcomings, he's got this, right? Gives hope to all of us. So I'd rather be the one walking on the water, even if I knew my own weaknesses were going to make me sink. And because he got to experience a compassionate rescue from a loving God. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a bad ending to the story. It's okay to fail if we fail and seek the right solution. So it can be overwhelming, I think, as a Christian. It can be overwhelming to take those daily steps, right? We talked about, like, Peter couldn't just take one step. He had to take multiple steps. And that's our job. And it can be exhausting, right? It can be emotionally exhausting to, God, what do you want me to do in this situation? Like, where are you asking me to go? And you would just love for him to be like, Tracy, these are the exact choices I would like you to make. And this is exactly how your life's going to play out, but it's not like that, right? It's like, gives you just a little bit. He usually just tells you kind of the one step, the next step you're supposed to take, and you have no idea what's next. Grizzly bear? You know, who knows? Like, what's after I take the step? I don't know. But God, he gives us just enough, but he wants us to keep taking those steps in faith. And it can be really exhausting. But I think it's reassuring to know that Jesus is also out there. Like, he never calls us out to some place that he's not already standing. Like, he wasn't on the boat saying, jump, Peter, I got you, right? He was out there already in the water showing Peter this can be done and being there to help him. And so whatever it is that God might be calling you to do today, whether it's maybe giving up like something in your life that is keeping you from being close to God, maybe it's a relationship issue, or maybe it's God asking you to trust him for a financial miracle or a job or whatever that thing is that God's asking you to take that step, he's already in the solution, like waiting for you to jump in and join you, right? And it may not be the cleanest jump, you may not stick the landing, but if you continue to lean on him, then the Bible says that he's going to be faithful to pull us out. It doesn't just say that in this story, but it says it throughout if you just read the whole Bible, the whole message. But I think the story is a good picture of that. So anyway, our faith is complicated, and it can be easy to focus, like I said, on the hard times, to focus on the wind. Peter was distracted by, like, you know, he made the leap, and then he gets out and he's like, oh wait, it's really stormy, windy out here. What have I done? What have I done? He's like, I regret this decision, right? And that can be us sometimes, kind of just like crippled in fear and not believing that God can do what he said he was able to do. So it can be complicated. We can focus on our storms, our interruptions, but if we do that too much, we're going to miss out on the powerful work that God is doing. Not just that he's doing, but that he's inviting you to participate in. Like, that's the most amazing part of the gospel, right? Is that God could do all this without us. It would probably be a lot easier. Like, how it's way easier for me to do the chores without my kids helping than it is with them helping. But he chooses to involve us in the story. And we can focus on the interruptions, or we can focus on the opportunities that God has given us to be a part of what he's doing. And that just remembering that he's with us in the storm. He was with us before. We all have those moments we can remember where God worked for us, right? Came through in ways that were miraculous. We got to remember those. We just got to store those in our hearts. So in those moments where the wind is crazy, we can be like, oh yeah, but God rescued me before, so I know he can rescue me again. And then hoping for what God has to do for each of us in the future and ways he's going to use us. So that's all I have for you today from the story, is that storms are going to come. Those are, I'd like to think of them as interruptions. Makes them sound less powerful, and they are, because they're less powerful than our God, right? And then faith is more than just taking one step out of the boat. You got to keep walking towards Jesus with intention, right? Not just kind of wandering around, but like eyes on Jesus walking, or you might sink. And then also that even if you do sink, thank God, failure isn't final, because we have Jesus. So that's what I want to share with you guys this morning. So we're going to take a minute to pray. I don't know if you guys want to come up and are you going to sing for prayer time?
Do a prayer and then,
Yeah.
invite people.
So we'll invite you guys up here. I'm going to pray for you guys, and we're going to invite you guys up here to pray. And if anybody has a specific thing that you want to pray for, I know I'm willing to pray with you. I'll be standing right down there. So if you're going through a particular thing that you're like, man, I'm really struggling to have faith in this situation or to step out of the boat here, I'm happy to pray for you. Or you're welcome to come up and pray on your own. But I'm just going to pray for all of us right now. Jesus, we love you so much, Lord. We thank you for your amazing gift that you gave us, not just by dying on the cross, although obviously that was an amazing gift, but also you gave us this Bible with the stories of how you lived, and that we can look at your life, and we can look at the way you interacted with the disciples and with people that you met, and we can see ourselves in that story, and we can be changed by it, Lord. And so we thank you for that. We thank you for this story, God, that calls us to have faith in the midst of a difficult situation. And Lord, that helps us remember that you were with us before the storm, you're going to be with us after the storm, and most importantly, even in the middle of the storm, you're right there. Whatever situation you're calling us into, to be courageous about, you're already standing there, right in the middle of the solution, right in the middle of the wind, just holding your hand out, waiting to help us make those steps that you've called us to make. And so God, I pray for every person in this room, no matter who we are and how long we serve Jesus, we all have situations in our lives that require an extra dose of faith. So Lord, I pray that you would increase our faith and that you would help us to trust in you in whatever ways, whether that's making decisions in our jobs or in our relationships, or God, just believing you for miracles and finances or healings, whatever different challenges we may have in our faith, Lord, that you would give us that courage. And Lord, that you would help us to come out on the other side and see the miracle, and not only do that, but share it with everybody that we know, Lord, that our lives will be a testimony of your mercy and grace. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen.